All federal agencies are telling workers to report back to work after the president signed the short-term funding bill Wednesday night. The Labor Department still has not released key economic data in more than a month. The White House now says the October jobs report may never be released, leaving the Fed heading into the next meeting without any official data on jobs, including the updated unemployment rate. BLS still assessing the backlog, warning it could take time to reset report release dates. And a new report from Jefferies this morning estimates that the shutdown cost roughly $15 billion a week. Fourth quarter GDP will likely fall to 1.5%, while roughly 60,000 non-federal workers lost their jobs in the middle of all of this. Joining me now is Counselor to the Treasury Secretary Joe Lavorgna. Joe, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Do you agree with those assessments from Jefferies this morning?
Yes, Maria. In fact, Council of Economic Advisors has come up with a similar number. In totality, it's about $90 billion. It's worth upwards of maybe 7/10 on GDP, nearly $700 per household. I mean, it's a large number. It did not need to happen. The president and the Treasury Secretary and many pleaded with the Democrats to not do this, sign a clean CR, which they ultimately did. But it cost a lot of money, a lot of hardship. Economists would call it deadweight loss. We're not going to get that output back. It's going to hurt the fourth quarter, and it didn't need to happen. But thank God some folks on the other side of the aisle came to their senses and supported us, and the government now is reopened.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of implications here, given the fact that a number of sectors are going to be having to talk about this during their earnings for the fourth quarter, right? I mean, whether it's financials and the inability to do IPOs, or whether it's travel and the inability to fly, or so many other impacts with the government shutdown for 43 days. What would you say is the most important impact that we need to understand?
Well, I think the most important impact, Maria, is that President Trump, promised a very resilient economy, and that's pretty much exactly what we had in the second quarter when he fully subsumed office, in the sense that it was his quarter, and the economy, excluding federal spending, grew 4.5%. In the third quarter, the widely followed Atlanta Fed had growth up at 4%, and this is all being driven by an incipient capex boom, strong consumer spending. And we were probably on track for at least 3% type of growth in the fourth quarter, which, because of the Democrat-led shutdown, growth will be cut in half. But thank God that one big, beautiful bill was signed in July. That is going to give tremendous middle and lower income tax relief to working families through the no tax on tip and overtime. People should see upwards of $200 billion in refunds in the first quarter. So the economy's underlying foundation is strong thanks to President Trump's policies. So 2026 should be a very strong year. But again, there was a lot of dislocation and hardship in the short term that was not helpful to anyone.
Right, of course. Well, Joe, the president is now stepping up his affordability push, rolling out new policies to ease pressure on household budgets. He's proposing a $2,000 check funded by the tariff revenue, a probe into rising beef prices, and a deal lowering the cost of weight loss drugs. He's also floating the idea of a 50-year mortgage option and direct health insurance subsidies. All of this as the White House prepares tariff cuts on key grocery items alongside new trade frameworks deals across Latin America. Tell us about this $2,000 check, because there's some debate on this. I mean, personally, I think it would be better to just use that money to pay down the $38 trillion in debt. But the president wants families to feel some help, feel some relief after all of this. Tell us about it.
Right. And that's one of President Trump's great strengths, Maria, because if we look in the first administration, we saw real median household income rise nearly $7,000 in the first few years of his presidency, which was the largest increase cumulatively, about threefold from the previous 16 years. So he understands it, and all those items you mentioned are all on the table for discussion. What makes me the most excited about President Trump's policies is he is inspiring a pro-growth supply-side boom, similar to what we saw in the first term, but accelerated this time around because we have 100% expensing on all capital expenditures, 100% expensing on factories, which we've never done before. The IRS will have those guidelines in place by year end. That will lead to a huge boom next year. That boom next year will be driven by American workers building factories all the equipment that's going to be in those factories will be used by American workers. That will lift productivity and living standards and wages. And that, to me, is the key way you get affordability to improve significantly.
Yeah.
Is after-tax real incomes for everyday Americans will be surging again. That, to me, is the key ingredient to Trumponomics.
Yeah, and the expensing is very important as well. I'm so glad you mentioned it. But look, the Supreme Court can put an end to this right away, right? I mean, they're weighing President Trump's emergency tariff authority right now. After last week's hearing, the administration says it's optimistic that the court will rule in their favor. But the decision carries massive implications, potentially meaning that the government will have to pay back, what, upwards of $200 billion in tariff revenue. Just as the president told me recently, it could set new limits on presidential trade powers, Joe. Your thoughts on this, how important it is, and what you're expecting?
Well, the secretary was there. He heard the arguments. He said, actually, if you shift through a lot of the questions and the noise, so to speak, that the arguments that we made were very powerful. They were the best arguments, the better arguments that were made, and we're confident that the court will not rule against us. If, however, the court does, there are options that are being considered. The president's tariff walls, which are key, Maria, to reindustrializing the manufacturing base and to incentivizing capital to come into the U.S., because we want to improve those supply chains, improve national security, which you do through economic security. There will be provisions, and there are many, that will be used to offset something should the court rule against us. So, we're on top of things. We'll see what happens. We're optimistic. But the tariffs will remain because there's such a pivotal policy to accomplish President Trump's goal and vision of reindustrializing the U.S. manufacturing base, which suffered disproportionately over the past 25 years when President Trump was not involved in this.
And you believe that the administration has enough backup in terms of Section 232 and Section 301 and all these other sections that we've talked about in terms of... Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, I believe there's about 5 of them, and that's where we would look to make sure that we are able to support the U.S. economy in the way that President Trump wants. So yes, as Secretary Besson said, it's not the most optimal choice, but we will accomplish our goals and our vision.
Right. Joe, great to catch up. Thanks very much for what you're doing and for joining us this morning. All right, Joe Lavorgna, good to see you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.